Ever imagine a family so powerful, their wane just stretched across centuries and like shaped the map of Europe.
Right.
Their fingerprints are everywhere in history.
Yeah.
I mean, from like huge palaces to bloody battlefields, from like fancy courts to those quiet rooms where like the fate of nations was decided. Today, we're diving deep into the world of the Habsburgs.
Yeah, a dynasty.
A dynasty.
Their story is just as captivating as like any epic novel you could pick up.
Totally.
And what's so fascinating about them is they weren't like always meant to be great.
Right.
They started as kind of a minor noble family, and honestly, rivals often underestimated them.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but through strategic brilliance, a good dose of ambition, and let's be honest, a little bit of luck,
Yeah.
they rose to dominate Europe for over 600 years.
6 centuries.
It's incredible.
That is a very long time. And to guide us through this intricate tapestry of history,
Yes.
we have a really extraordinary perspective.
Yeah.
We're drawing on a conversation with a real-life Habsburg,
Oh, yeah.
Archduke Edward Habsburg Lothringen.
Okay.
Not only is he a descendant of this powerful lineage, but he's also the Hungarian ambassador to the Holy See.
Wow. Talk about a unique lens to look at history through.
I mean, that's got to be pretty amazing
Yeah.
to get that perspective.
It's remarkable.
Yeah.
He really gives you that insider's view. He blends like personal stories and anecdotes,
Right.
like
Yeah.
a really deep understanding of his family's legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of takes all of this vast history and boils it down to 5 key dates.
Okay.
Each one is kind of a turning point that really shows the Habsburgs' rise and then eventually, their decline.
Their fall.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's start with date number 1,
Okay.
1273.
All right.
This is when Rudolph I, kind of a seemingly unremarkable count, becomes the king of the Holy Roman Empire.
Huh.
This is their grand entrance onto the European stage, but as Edward points out, they were far from like the obvious choice.
Interesting. So why him?
Well, Rudolph was initially seen as kind of a weak figure, someone who could be easily controlled by the more powerful nobles.
Oh, so they thought they could use him.
Right.
Gotcha.
But he had this knack for strategic maneuvering and a really keen sense of opportunity.
Oh, okay.
So his election as king was really a testament to their early ability to play the political game to their advantage.
Fascinating.
Now, fast forward to around the year 1500,
Okay.
and we encounter Maximilian I,
Okay.
a ruler who understood that power wasn't just won on the battlefield, but also in the marriage bed.
Oh, interesting.
So through a series of strategic alliances, often involving his own children,
Oh, wow.
he expanded Habsburg influence across Europe and even into the newly discovered Americas.
This is where that image of the Habsburgs as like master strategists really comes into play.
Yeah.
Think about like these intricate webs of alliances. Marriages are basically political chess moves. And the family tree, it just turns into this tangled web of power.
It's like a soap opera, but with real power.
Totally.
Yeah.
It was a time of courtly romance for sure, but also just ruthless ambition.
Wow. Daughters weren't just heirs to be married off.
No.
They were diplomatic assets, pawns in this grand game of power and influence.
Wow, that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. And speaking of powerful women, our third pivotal date brings us to 1700.
Okay.
And this is when the Spanish branch of the Habsburgs dies out.
Oh.
And even the Austrian line is kind of teetering on the brink of extinction.
Oh, wow.
But then comes Maria Theresa,
Okay.
a woman who defied expectations and left like a permanent mark on history.
Wow. So tell me about her. What's her story?
I mean, her story is one of resilience and determination.
Mhm.
Just imagine inheriting the throne at a time of crisis, facing down invading armies,
Yeah.
and on top of that, raising 16 children.
Wow.
She was a force to be reckoned with. A woman who not only secured her own inheritance, but also expanded the empire and redefined what it meant to be a female ruler in that era.
Talk about a role model.
For sure.
But even the most powerful empires, they face challenges.
I do.
And the Habsburgs, they were no exception.
Right.
So our fourth date, 1806, this marks a big shift in Europe. Napoleon Bonaparte,
Oh, wow.
the self-proclaimed emperor, he forces the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire.
Which had been the Habsburgs' power base for centuries.
Yeah, for centuries, this could have been the end for them. I
Yeah.
mean, so many empires crumble under that kind of pressure.
Totally.
But the Habsburgs, They were masters of adaptation.
They were.
They transformed themselves. They shed the Holy Roman Empire, and they formed the Austrian Empire and later the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Oh, wow.
It shows how they could recognize when change was inevitable.
Right.
And they adapted to the new realities of power.
They were like political chameleons,
Yes.
shifting and evolving to survive.
Exactly. But even the most adaptable dynasties have their limits.
That's true.
So the final date on Edward's list, November 12th, 1918.
Okay.
The world was reeling from World War I.
Mm-hmm.
And Emperor Karl, the last Habsburg ruler,
Yeah.
he was forced to abdicate. Their reign seemingly comes to an end.
It's a poignant moment in history, the fall of a dynasty that has shaped the destiny of Europe for so long.
Yeah.
But does their legacy truly end there?
Right. That's the question.
Yeah.
Are there echoes of the Habsburg way? Their strategies, their values, do they still resonate today?
Right.
So to answer that, Edward gives us a framework. He calls it, quote unquote, the Habsburg way.
Okay.
7 rules for navigating turbulent times, drawn straight from his family's playbook.
And, we love a good set of rules. So
Yeah.
rule number 1 is a classic. Get married and have lots of children.
Mm-hmm.
But Edward isn't just talking about building big families.
Right.
He's highlighting how crucial strategic marriages were to Habsburg expansion.
Huh.
Daughters weren't just heirs. They were diplomatic assets,
Oh, I see.
carefully placed to forge alliances and solidify power.
So it's a reminder that power, especially back then, it wasn't just about military might.
Right.
It was about creating this complex web of relationships, using marriage as a tool to secure influence and expand their reach.
It's like a real-life Game of Thrones with royal weddings as the ultimate power move.
Exactly.
And speaking of those marriages, we can't ignore the elephant in the room, the infamous Habsburg jaw.
Oh, yeah.
That pronounced chin.
Yeah.
That's often attributed to generations of inbreeding.
Right.
But Edward offers a more nuanced perspective, challenging some common misconceptions about those often criticized unions.
Okay, so tell me more.
So it's not as simple as saying, oh, they all married their cousins and that's why they had the Habsburg jaw.
Right.
Edward traces that distinctive feature back to a specific ancestor
Oh, interesting.
and emphasizes that many of these marriages, while perhaps strategically motivated, were also based on shared faith, values, and even, as he puts it, a sense of humor.
Okay, so it's more complicated than just like, oh, they just married their cousins. There was more to it.
It wasn't just like a genetic lottery. It was more about like finding the right match.
Right. It's fascinating to think about the human side of these big political strategies.
Yeah.
It makes you see these marriages not just as cold calculations,
Yeah.
but as unions between people who, in a lot of cases, shared genuine affection and a common purpose.
They had things in common.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that history is rarely black and white.
Oh, absolutely.
It's full of these complex, often contradictory motivations and outcomes.
Exactly.
Now, rule number 2 in the Habsburg way is perhaps the most deeply ingrained in their identity. Be a Catholic.
Okay.
Edward argues that their devout faith wasn't just a matter of personal belief. It was a driving force in their decision-making.
Yeah.
Their view of themselves as rulers, and even, he suggests, a key to their family unity.
So their faith was really central to who they were, how they ruled, how they saw themselves.
It really was. And this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The Habsburgs saw their rule as divinely ordained, like a responsibility bestowed upon them by God.
Interesting.
This belief infused their approach to leadership, to justice, to how they interacted with their subjects.
I see.
But this raises a crucial question.
Yeah.
Were they too devout?
Oh.
Did their unwavering commitment to Catholicism blind them to other perspectives, perhaps even contributing to religious conflicts in Europe?
It's a great question. And, Edward doesn't shy away from the complexities of this.
Right.
He explores the reign of Ferdinand II,
Okay.
a Habsburg emperor who played a pivotal role in the 30 Years' War,
Right.
a conflict that was fueled in part by religious tensions.
Right.
Ferdinand was a man of deep conviction, but his actions had far-reaching and often devastating consequences.
Right. So he really believed in what he was doing, but it caused a lot of problems.
Yeah. It highlights that tension between religious conviction and political power.
Yeah.
Even with the best intentions, trying to promote religious unity can lead to division and conflict and a lot of suffering.
Yeah. And a lot of suffering.
Yeah. It's a cautionary tale that we can still learn from today.
For sure. Now, rule number 3 might seem a bit jarring to modern ears.
Okay.
Believe in empire and subsidiarity.
Okay, so unpack that one for me.
So the word empire often evokes images of conquest and exploitation.
Right.
But Edward argues that the Habsburg approach was different.
Okay.
They believed in a model that, while vast and encompassing,
Yeah.
allowed for a degree of self-governance within its diverse territory.
So this is where subsidiarity comes in, right? It's the idea that decisions should be made at the lowest possible level, closest to the people they affect.
Exactly. So rather than a centralized top-down approach,
Yeah.
the Habsburgs, at least in theory, favored a system where local communities had a voice in their own governance.
Okay, so instead of trying to make this big empire all the same, they embraced its diversity.
Yes.
Different regions could keep their own customs and laws, even their languages, but still be part of this larger whole.
Exactly.
Interesting.
So it's a model that has clear parallels with the modern concept of federalism, where power is shared between a central authority and regional governments.
I see.
And Edward makes a bold and, I think, even provocative connection between the Habsburg model and the challenges facing the European Union today.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
He suggests that the EU, with its own struggles to balance unity and diversity, could learn a thing or two from the Habsburgs.
Okay.
He even hints that perhaps if the EU had adopted a more, quote-unquote Habsburgian approach, Brexit might never have happened.
It's a fascinating thought experiment, isn't it? Could a model from so long ago be relevant to the future of Europe?
Yeah.
Is there wisdom we could learn from the Habsburgs and how they managed such a complex, multi-ethnic, multilingual entity?
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about. These are questions that are still debated by historians and political scientists today.
I bet.
Okay, moving on to rule number 4. Stand for law and justice for your subjects.
All right.
This one might seem like a no-brainer for any ruler,
Yeah.
but Edward argues that the Habsburgs had a particular commitment to this principle.
Oh, okay.
He uses the example of his ancestor, Archduke Joseph, Palatine of Hungary, as the embodiment of this ideal.
Okay, so tell me about Archduke Joseph. What made him so special?
So what's remarkable about Archduke Joseph is that he wasn't just some distant ruler issuing decrees from afar.
Okay.
He was deeply involved in the lives of his people, working tirelessly to improve their education, infrastructure, well-being.
Because he was really hands-on.
Yeah, he was like the Habsburg version of a community organizer.
I like that.
Founding schools, hospitals, fire departments, basically anything that could make people's lives better.
That's amazing. It challenges that traditional image we have of the aloof, power-hungry monarch.
Right.
Archduke Joseph, he represents a different model of leadership, one that's based on service and compassion and a genuine care for the people he ruled.
Yeah. I mean, he was really a man of the people.
That's great.
But, of course, no empire is without its flaws. And the Habsburgs, despite their ideals, were always benevolent rulers. We have to acknowledge the darker chapters of their history.
Right.
Times when their actions fell short of their own stated principles.
Of course, yeah.
And Edward doesn't shy away from those complexities. He admits that there were instances where the Habsburgs engaged in colonialism,
Right.
suppressed rebellions, made decisions that benefited their own interests at the expense of others. It's a reminder that even the most well-intentioned rulers can be susceptible to the corrupting influence of power.
Yeah, power can be a dangerous thing. It can change people.
It can.
And history is rarely simple.
It's not.
And the Habsburgs, like every powerful dynasty, had their good times and their bad times.
Their ups and their downs.
And exactly.
Now, rule number 5 is perhaps the most intriguing
Okay.
and I think the most revealing of the Habsburg mindset.
Okay.
Know who you are.
Okay.
And this isn't just about personal identity. It's about understanding the power of narrative, of crafting a compelling story about your origins and your right to rule.
Interesting.
Edward reveals how the Habsburgs essentially invented their title of Archduke.
What?
Based on some rather questionable historical documents that conveniently supported their claim to power.
They made it up.
Well, they kind of found some documents that kind of said what they wanted them to say.
So it's like they went looking for ancestors and came back with a title that no one else had.
Exactly.
And they weren't afraid to to stretch the truth a little bit to make it work.
They were pretty good storytellers.
Makes you wonder how much of history is just really good storytelling.
That's a great question.
It reminds us to really look at our sources, to question what we think we know, and to remember that history is always being written and rewritten, often by the people in charge.
It's all about perspective.
And sometimes the people who control the story, they control the power.
Exactly.
The Habsburgs, they knew that, and they used it to their advantage.
They were pretty smart.
Yeah.
Now, rule number 6, be brave in battle. It might seem like an odd rule for a dynasty known for its diplomacy and strategic marriages.
Right.
But Edward argues that the Habsburgs were no strangers to the battlefield.
Oh, okay.
He uses the example of Archduke Charles's victory over Napoleon at the Battle of Aspern in 1809,
Wow.
now defeating Napoleon.
Yeah.
That's got to be a major feather in your cap.
For sure. I mean, Napoleon was thought to be almost unbeatable at that point.
Right.
And yet Archduke Charles comes along, rallies his troops,
Yeah.
leads a countercharge, and ends up crushing the French.
I mean, it's a remarkable feat.
It really is.
It just goes to show that even the mightiest empires can be vulnerable.
Yeah,
and that sometimes courage and determination can overcome seemingly insurmountable odds.
It's a good reminder that sometimes diplomacy fails.
It does.
And you have to be willing to fight for what you believe in, even when the odds are against you.
Exactly.
It's inspiring.
And finally, we come to rule number 7, die well. Now, this might seem like a strange concept in our modern world.
Yeah.
But Edward argues that the Habsburgs had a unique perspective on death, one that was deeply rooted in their faith and their understanding of their own mortality.
Okay.
He describes their fascinating, if somewhat morbid, knocking ceremony at the Capuchin crypt in Vienna.
The knocking ceremony. I've never heard of that.
So imagine this, the deceased's coffin is brought to the crypt,
Okay.
and a monk knocks 3 times on the door.
Okay.
He then announces the deceased's titles and accomplishments, only to be told, "We know him not."
Wow.
It's a powerful symbol of the fleeting nature of earthly power and possessions.
It's like they're saying all those worldly achievements, the
Yeah.
titles, the riches, they don't mean anything when you face eternity.
Exactly.
It's a very humbling ritual.
It is.
A reminder that we're all equal in death.
Yeah.
And Edward doesn't just focus on the rituals. He also shares the story of Marie Antoinette's final hours,
Okay.
revealing how she found solace in her faith even as she faced execution.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah, it speaks to that Habsburg belief in a higher power, a
Right.
sense of purpose that went beyond the ups and downs of this life. It's pretty amazing.
It really is. It's a reminder that even in the face of death there can be grace, dignity, and a sense of peace.
It is. It's a testament to the human spirit, its ability to find meaning and solace even in the darkest times.
It really is. So here we are at the end of our Habsburg deep dive.
Yeah.
We've explored their rise and fall, their triumphs and failures, their strategies and their beliefs.
It's quite a story.
It is. And we've grappled with the question, are there lessons to be learned from the Habsburg way? Can a dynasty that seems so distant, so rooted in a different era, offer any insights for us in the 21st century?
Right. What can we learn from them?
I think the answer is a resounding yes.
I think so too.
Because ultimately the Habsburg story is a human story. The story about ambition, power, faith, family, and the enduring legacy we leave behind.
I like that.
It's fascinating to me how they managed to hold on to power for so long, navigating such a complex and ever-changing world. What do you think was their secret?
Well, I think it was a combination of things. Their strategic brilliance, their ability to adapt,
Right.
and their deep understanding of how power, religion, and culture all work together.
Right.
But I think most importantly, they understood the importance of unity in diversity.
That's something that really stands out to me, this idea that they were able to maintain this vast multi-ethnic empire by allowing for a certain level of autonomy and self-governance within their territories. Do you think that's a model that could be applied today in a world that often feels increasingly fractured and divided?
It's a great question.
It is.
And I think there are definitely parts of the Habsburg approach that could be relevant.
Yeah.
That idea of subsidiarity, of giving power to local communities, that's something that resonates in a lot of places today.
Yeah.
So it's like they understood that true strength doesn't come from forcing everyone to be the same. Right.
It comes from harnessing the collective power of many different voices and perspectives.
And that's a powerful idea.
It is.
So as we leave the world of the Habsburgs behind, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away from this deep dive? What's the spark you want to ignite in their own curiosity?
I would say I'd encourage everyone to think about the concept of legacy, not just in the historical sense, but on a personal level.
Okay.
What kind of mark do we want to leave on the world?
Right.
What stories do we want to tell? The Habsburgs, with all their complexities,
Yeah.
they left a mark on history that's still here today. What will yours be?
That's a great question.
I think so.
A great question to think about.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the world of the Habsburgs.
It was my pleasure.
And be sure to join us next time when we explore another fascinating chapter of history. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning.
And keep learning. And keep learning. Now, rule number 6, be brazen in battle. It might seem like a strange rule for a dynasty known for its diplomacy and strategic marriages.
Yeah, you wouldn't think of them as like warriors.
Right. But Edward argues that the Habsburgs were no strangers to the battlefield.
Oh, interesting.
He uses the example of Archduke Charles's victory over Napoleon at the Battle of Aspern in 1809.
Wow.
Now, defeating Napoleon.
Yeah.
That's got to be a major feather in your cap.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
I mean, Napoleon was considered almost unbeatable at this point.
Right.
And then you have Archduke Charles rallying his troops, leading a countercharge, and ultimately delivering a crushing defeat to the French.
It's a remarkable feat.
It really is.
It just goes to show that even the mightiest empires can be vulnerable, and that sometimes courage and determination can overcome seemingly insurmountable odds.
Yeah, it's a reminder that sometimes diplomacy just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to fight for what you believe in, even when the odds are stacked against you.
And finally, we come to rule number 7, die well.
Die well.
Now, this might seem like a strange concept in our modern world.
Yeah, a little bit.
But Edward argues that the Habsburgs had a unique perspective on death.
Okay.
One that was deeply rooted in their faith and their understanding of their own mortality.
Okay, so how did they approach death differently?
He describes this fascinating, if somewhat morbid, knocking ceremony at the Capuchin crypt in Vienna.
The knocking ceremony. Okay, I'm intrigued.
So imagine this. The deceased's coffin is brought to the crypt,
Okay.
and a monk knocks 3 times on the door.
Okay.
He then announces the deceased's titles and accomplishments,
Okay.
only to be told, "We know him not."
Wow, that's powerful.
It's a powerful symbol of the fleeting nature of earthly power and possessions.
It's like a reality check on
Yeah.
those worldly achievements, titles, the riches. They don't mean anything in the face of eternity. It's a very humbling ritual.
It is a reminder that we are all equal in death.
Yeah, no matter who you are in life, we all end up the same way.
Right. And Edward doesn't just focus on the rituals.
Okay.
He also shares the story of Marie Antoinette's final hours,
Oh, wow.
revealing how she found solace in her faith, even as she faced execution.
That's really powerful. It speaks to that Habsburg belief in a higher power,
Right.
a sense of purpose that transcends the trials and tribulations of this life.
It's a reminder that even in the face of death, there can be grace, dignity, and a sense of peace.
It's a testament to the human spirit, you know, its ability to find meaning and solace even in the darkest of times.
Absolutely. So here we are at the end of our Habsburg deep dive.
Wow. It went by fast.
It did. We've explored their rise and fall, their triumphs and failures, their strategies and their beliefs.
It's quite a story.
And we've grappled with the question, are there lessons to be learned from the Habsburg way? Can a dynasty that seems so distant, so rooted in a different era, offer any insights for us in the 21st century?
Yeah, it's hard to believe that something from so long ago could still be relevant today.
But I think the answer is a resounding yes.
I agree.
Because ultimately, the Habsburg story is a human story.
It is.
It's a story about ambition, power, faith, family, and the enduring legacy we leave behind.
That's a great way to put it.
You know, it's fascinating to me how they managed to hold on to power for so long, navigating such a complex and ever-changing world. What do you think was their secret?
Well, I think it was a combination of factors. Their strategic brilliance, their ability to adapt,
Mm.
and their deep understanding of how power, religion, and culture all interacted.
Right.
But perhaps most importantly, they understood the importance of unity in diversity.
That's something that really stands out to me, this idea that they were able to maintain this vast multi-ethnic empire by allowing for a certain level of autonomy and self-governance within their territories.
Yeah, that's pretty remarkable.
Do you think that's a model that could be applied today in a world that often feels increasingly fractured and divided?
That's a really interesting question. I think there are definitely elements of the Habsburg approach that could be relevant. The idea of subsidiarity, of empowering local communities,
Yeah.
that resonates in many parts of the world today.
It's like they understood that true strength doesn't come from imposing a single vision.
Right.
It comes from harnessing the collective power of many different voices and perspectives.
Exactly. And that's a lesson that has implications not just for nations, but for organizations, communities, even our personal relationships.
So as we leave the world of the Habsburgs behind, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away from this deep dive? What's the spark you want to ignite in their own curiosity?
I would encourage everyone to think about the concept of legacy,
Right.
not just in the grand historical
Yeah.
sense, but on a personal level. What kind of mark do we want to leave on the world?
Right.
What stories do we want to tell? The Habsburgs, for all their complexities,
Yeah.
they left a mark on history that's still here today. What will yours be?
Yeah, it's a powerful message. It really makes you think about what matters most in the end.
It does. It puts things in perspective.
Absolutely. So here we are at the end of our Habsburg deep dive. We've explored their rise and fall, their triumphs and failures, their strategies and their beliefs.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
It really has. And we've grappled with the question, are there lessons to be learned from the Habsburg way? Can a dynasty that seems so distant, so rooted in a different era, offer any insights for us in the 21st century?
Yeah, can we really apply anything from their time to ours?
I think the answer is a resounding yes,
I think so too.
because ultimately the Habsburg story is a human story. It's a story about ambition, power, faith, family, and the enduring legacy we leave behind.
It's about what it means to be human, really.
It really is. It's fascinating to me how they managed to hold on to power for so long, navigating such a complex and ever-changing world. What do you think was their secret?
I think it was a combination of things. Their strategic brilliance, their ability to adapt,
Right.
and their deep understanding of how power, religion, and culture all interacted.
Right.
But perhaps most importantly, they understood the importance of unity in diversity.
That's something that really stands out to me. This idea that they were able to maintain this vast multi-ethnic empire by allowing for a certain level of autonomy and self-governance
Yeah.
within their territories.
Yeah, it's impressive how they managed to do that.
Do you think that's a model that could be applied today in a world that often feels increasingly fractured and divided?
It's a tough question, but I do think there are definitely elements of the Habsburg approach that could be relevant.
Okay.
The idea of subsidiarity, of empowering local communities, that's something that resonates in many parts of the world today.
It's like they understood that true strength doesn't come from imposing a single vision.
Right.
It comes from harnessing the collective power of many different voices and perspectives.
Yeah, it's about bringing people together, not forcing them apart.
Exactly. And that's a powerful idea.
It is.
So as we leave the world of the Habsburgs behind, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away from this deep dive? What's the spark you want to ignite in their own curiosity?
I would encourage everyone to think about the concept of legacy, not just in the grand historical sense,
Right.
but on a personal level. What kind of mark do we want to leave on the world?
Right.
What stories do we want to tell? The Habsburgs, for all their complexities,
Yeah.
they left a mark on history that's still here today. What will yours be?
I think that's a great question.
I think so.
A great question to think about.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the world of the Habsburgs. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
And for our listeners, be sure to join us next time when we explore another fascinating chapter of history. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.